Iranian media and IRGC-linked outlets are now claiming that Tehran may have pierced American air defenses during its latest missile and drone operation, with reports asserting that as many as 70% of projectiles successfully reached their intended targets. Supporters of Iran's military response are portraying the operation as proof that Tehran's missiles were able to overcome U.S. regional defenses, despite Washington insisting that nearly all incoming threats were intercepted before causing significant damage. According to IRGC-linked claims, U.S. facilities in Jordan, Kuwait and Bahrain were among the targets struck during the operation, raising fresh questions about whether America's regional military network was more vulnerable than previously believed after the latest round of escalation. On June 10, Iranian officials and state-linked media outlets highlighted what they described as a successful missile and drone operation against U.S. military facilities across the Gulf region. According to IRGC-linked Fast News, nearly 70% of the missiles and drones launched during the operation successfully reached their intended targets at U.S. bases despite regional air defense systems. Iranian military sources further claimed that satellite imagery and intelligence assessments indicated a high success rate for the strikes, reinforcing Tehran's narrative that the operation achieved its objectives. According to reports cited by Iran International, the ballistic missiles and drones were directed at pre-selected U.S. military targets as part of a coordinated retaliatory operation. The reports also claimed that Iranian strikes reached U.S.-linked facilities in Jordan, Kuwait and Bahrain, though these assertions differ sharply from initial American assessments of the attack. Iran has intensified pressure on Washington, combining military retaliation with a diplomatic campaign following the latest escalation linked to the Apache incident. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi rejected the U.S. justification for its actions and insisted Tehran has the right to respond under international law. Araghchi held talks with his Saudi and Turkish counterparts, seeking to rally regional support after the latest U.S. strikes on Iranian territory. Iran accused Washington of violating its sovereignty, as diplomatic tensions rapidly escalated into fresh military exchanges across the region. Araghchi warned that Iran's armed forces reserve the right to respond, saying any attack on the country cannot be left unanswered. Iran Ministry of Foreign Affairs statement read, and I quote, "In the early hours of Wednesday, June 10, 1405, under the pretext of the downing of one of its army's Apache helicopters over the Strait of Hormuz, the American terrorist regime carried out savage attacks Monday night against several areas in the south of the country. These attacks are flagrant violation of the United Nations Charter, particularly Article 2, Paragraph 4, and the fundamental principle prohibiting the use of force in international relations. With these aggressive actions, the ruling American establishment has once again demonstrated its criminal and warmongering nature. In response to the U.S. military aggression against Iran and the blatant violation of our country's national sovereignty and territorial integrity, the powerful armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran, exercising their legitimate right to self-defense, struck hard the American bases and assets in the region that were the source of these aggressions. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, while strongly condemning the American crime of military aggression against Iran, once again reminds all countries of the region, particularly those located on the southern shores of the Persian Gulf, of their legal and ethical responsibility to prevent the U.S. terrorist army and the Zionist regime from using their territory and facilities to plan, organize, execute, and support aggressive actions against Iran. It warns that the Islamic Republic of Iran will not hesitate to exercise its inherent right to self-defense, including by targeting the source of attacks as well as the bases and logistical facilities used to carry out and support aggressive operations against Iran. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran also once again reminds the United Nations of its responsibility, particularly the Security Council and the Secretary General, to safeguard international peace and security and to hold the aggressor parties accountable." Unquote. As fresh missile launches and retaliatory strikes unfolded across the region, Iran accused Washington of driving the crisis toward a broader confrontation. Iran says recent U.S. strikes violated its sovereignty. Amid the escalating conflict, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi held separate calls with Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan and Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan to discuss regional developments. Iran International's report said, and I quote, "Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said he held separate phone calls with Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan and Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan overnight to discuss regional developments after U.S. strikes on southern Iran." Araghchi condemned the U.S. strikes and the calls and said they violated Iran's national sovereignty and territorial integrity. He said Iran had an inherent right to self-defense and to a reciprocal response by its armed forces. Unquote. Iran says its retaliation has begun, warning Washington that any further military action will come at a far greater cost. The Revolutionary Guards say multiple American facilities were targeted as Tehran expands its response across the region. Iran claims a coordinated operation struck key U.S. military positions stretching across the Gulf and beyond. The latest exchange marks one of the most significant escalations since the current U.S.-Iran confrontation began. Tehran says American bases across several countries are now within the scope of its expanding retaliation. Iran claims strategic U.S. military assets were targeted as fears grow of a wider regional conflict. Tehran is signaling that any new American strikes could trigger even broader attacks across the region. IRGC statement read, and I quote, "Four important targets were hit at the airbase and command center of the child-killing American army in Al-Azraq, Jordan." Following the successful operation of the IRGC Navy in hitting 21 targets in American air and naval bases in the region and shooting down an MQ-9 drone in the skies of Jam County, and in view of the enemy's continued mischief, in completing the retaliatory operation, the forces of Islam and the brave fighters of the IRGC Aerospace Force, using their long-range solid-fuel missiles, targeted and destroyed four important targets, including the hangars of F-35 fighter jets at the airbase and command center of the child-killing American army in Al-Azraq, Jordan. Our forces are ready for a crushing and decisive response to any renewed aggression by the enemy, and the consequences of any renewed aggression will be the responsibility of the American enemy." Unquote. Meanwhile, reports emerged of fresh attacks targeting U.S. military bases in Bahrain and Kuwait, signaling a further escalation in the rapidly widening confrontation. Iran claims its latest retaliatory strike directly targeted the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, marking a major escalation in the Gulf confrontation. The IRGC is warning that American military installations across the Middle East remain vulnerable if Washington continues its military campaign against Iran. Iran says its retaliation extended beyond Bahrain, with missile and drone attacks also targeting U.S. military facilities in Kuwait. Tehran claims long-range missiles struck key targets at the Al-Azraq airbase in Jordan, where American forces maintain a strategic presence. Iran has vowed a crushing response to any further U.S. attacks, signaling that its retaliatory campaign could widen across the region if tensions continue to rise. Iran International reports said, and I quote, "Iran's Revolutionary Guard said they struck four key targets at the U.S. Al-Azraq airbase in Jordan, including what they described as F-35 fighter shelters and a command and control center." In a statement carried by Fast News, the IRGC said the attack was part of a continuing retaliatory operation following earlier strikes by its naval forces on U.S. facilities in the region and the reported downing of a U.S. MQ-9 drone over Bushehr province. The Guard said their aerospace force used long-range solid-fuel missiles to target and destroy four sites at the base. The IRGC warned that Iranian forces remain prepared to deliver a decisive and crushing response to any further attacks and said responsibility for the consequences of future military action would rest with the United States. Unquote. Iran has warned Washington of consequences after U.S. strikes near the Strait of Hormuz, vowing retaliation and raising fears of a wider regional conflict. After President Trump ordered retaliatory strikes over the downing of a U.S. Apache helicopter, Tehran responded with fresh threats and military action, escalating tensions across the Gulf. As CENTCOM wrapped up its strikes against Iranian targets, Tehran claimed to have launched attacks on U.S. bases, signaling that the confrontation is far from over.